Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this rainy afternoon on our panel on the Indian parliamentary elections and how public service, public interest media across the country are collaborating to cover these polls and the coming political term. And so to quickly set the stage, we're talking about nearly 1 billion eligible voters. And these elections that just started today will take place over the course of 6 weeks. And they're going to be divided over 7 phases. And the counting will happen in early June. And so it has become fairly clear that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to, or it appears to be the case that he'll be winning a 3rd consecutive term, which is quite a rarity in India's short history of elections. And this also means that the Bharatiya Janata Party is going to be expanding its Hindu nationalist agenda. And so taking all of these conditions into account, Supriya, maybe you could start with how the Scroll's experience of covering elections and how over the years you've kind of adapted or recalibrated your approach to election coverage, because the Scroll actually marked its 10th year anniversary recently, right? So this means that in all of the years of the newsroom's existence, the Modi government has been in power, and there's been an erosion of the secular foundation of the country. So how are you now working with other independent media, like your peers here at the News Minute and The Wire, to cover these elections this time around, and what are the priorities?
Thanks, Preethi. Preethi, I've been a journalist for about 22 years. 10 of those years I've been working for Scroll, but even previously, elections are always a very exciting time. It's a time when there's a lot of conversation in the newsroom about how do you best cover the election, how do you ensure that you're not covering it just as a gladiatorial contest, fixating on personalities, on speeches, on kind of drama and conflict, but going beyond that, paying attention to the issues, to concerns of voters. And as a journalist, I've found it exhilarating to travel around the country, to listen in deeply to conversations that ordinary folks are having, how voters are making up their minds. But this time, it's really difficult to get enthused about this election because I can't shake off the feeling that what's happening is a charade. We've been very proud of the fact that we are the world's largest democracy, but in the past decade, ever since Narendra Modi came to power, we've just been sliding down the scales, and currently we're bracketed as an elected autocracy, which means elections are still being held, but for all practical purposes, they're no longer free and fair because there is no level playing field. The ruling party has cornered 60% of political funding. It's 8 times richer than the next party. It's richer than all other 20 parties put together. The media megaphones have been captured. The opposition, well, 2 chief ministers from opposition parties are currently in jail on money laundering charges, where they've been arrested under a law where they can't get bail until they can prove the charges against them are false. So the reverse burden of proof. The leading opposition party, Congress, got its bank accounts nearly frozen last month because of income tax dues that they were expected to pay. All of this is happening with, just weeks before polling starts, and now while polling is underway, those chief ministers are still in jail. So there really isn't, a level playing field anymore, and voters can also see that. There was some astonishing data that came out recently. There is, a very well-respected group of political scientists. They do the only nationally representative poll survey, the Lokniti survey, and this time they found that 45% of their respondents said that they believe it's likely that electronic voting machines are being manipulated by the ruling party. Only a quarter of their respondents said that they trust the Election Commission, the body that conducts the electoral exercise, which shows that there are massive, trust issues now. Many Indian voters do not trust the Election Commission. They do not believe that their votes are being accurately recorded and accurately counted. And that's kind of shaking the foundation of a democracy, because trust is the bedrock of elections. And when you have such massive voter mistrust issues, and they're good reasons to have that mistrust, as experts have explained, what could potentially be the vulnerabilities of this voting process. So, against this backdrop, it's a little hard to summon enthusiasm for covering this elections as if this is business as normal. It is not. This is not a normal election. Despite that, of course, it's our job as journalists to talk about this, and that's what we're trying to do. We've been now reporting on some of the things that I mentioned, the voter mistrust, the concerns about voting machines. We're, of course, also doing, the usual ground reporting to listen into conversations with voters and understand why some of them are voting for Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party. Is it because of the Hindu nationalist project? Is it because of, this kind of media capture where voters are, day in and out being bombarded with propaganda, and that's kind of convincing them, even though their own personal lives tell them that things aren't looking good, but because the media is telling them that, India's stature is rising on the world scene, so they're like, okay, let's vote for Modi because he's such a tall leader that he's capable of stopping the Ukraine war to ensure that, Indian students stuck in the war zone can be evacuated. That's actually a campaign ad of Bharatiya Janata Party. And that's the kind of stuff that their leaders say, and that gets regularly published in newspapers without actually a fact check. So against this sort of larger backdrop, to come to how we're collaborating, well, one of the things that we have done, all of us, like 5 small independent newsrooms, The Wire, News Minute, Scroll, News Laundry, Caravan. Last year we got together, in the summer there was a major election in a state in southern India, Karnataka, and we decided that, we should do an election show. We're all very distinct in our approaches to stories. We have our distinct voice, and there's a lot of beauty in diversity, but occasionally it's great to sort of come together and have a bigger voice. And I think that was the idea, that individually each of these newsrooms can, of course, pull off shows of their own. But if we come together and do a show, and if the same show is being live streamed on the YouTube channels of all the organizations, we get a bigger audience. There is an audience for independent news. There's this sort of vacuum, partly last year, also that it sort of was accentuated by the fact that the last big television network that was sort of seen as independent was bought over by a crony of the Narendra Modi government. The Adani group acquired NDTV, and that meant that on election results day, for those who wanted an independent perspective on the results, they didn't really have anywhere to turn to, and we thought that this is an opportunity for us to step in to that space and work together.
And so, Supriya, you've mentioned a number of things there, from misinformation being blatantly broadcast through these private channels that are essentially mouthpieces of the Modi government. Then there's the actual clampdown on media. Then there's obviously social media being treated as a verified source of information by a majority that have access to affordable smartphones. So amid all of this, you just mentioned that you're working together because there is strength in numbers. And part of the reason, I suppose, you create these stories is richer content, but also the other strength of collaborations is around audience engagement, reaching more diverse communities, because the different platforms might have different target audiences, but also converting these audiences into paid membership, right? And Vignesh, at the News Minute, I know that your role is more focused on impact and creating revenue, and you often work with different media outlets in advising them on the most suitable revenue models and also streamlining their audience engagement strategies. And I know that you've actually held physical events around membership. Now that's really interesting that media are coming together not just to diversify their communities, but also to actually increase their profitability together. Can you tell us a bit about these events and what are you seeing and what would you do differently as you move forward?
So just coming back to the context of where Preethi was saying that, we're coming together so that, we're reaching a larger audience and stuff like that. So I'll just give you some kind of perspective. 2 months ago, I was in another event and then I met a very big publisher. And then I asked him, how many copies do you publish in a day? And he said, we publish about 3,500 copies a day. This is what big media does in a country like ours. Now, collectively, all of us put together, I think, will not even be publishing about 3,000 copies in a month. Okay, and their traffic runs into 500 million page views and stuff like that. I think the three of us put together would be touching about 15 million page views. So we're not coming here together to compete against big media as such, which at the end of the day is doing whatever it does. But see, one of the reasons that it actually makes sense to come together is we have a large overlapping audience, for sure. We're probably not pulling out the data numbers and looking at it, but I can safely say that there's 30 or 40% of our readership which is shared across all these platforms. So it just generally makes sense to have a collaborative approach rather than each of us creating a single individual show and then going out there and saying that, hey, look, we're doing this and we're doing this. So yes, obviously the advantages are there where we are sharing our resources. We're able to pull off a much better show. But the main thing that actually applies is we're not taking away the ad revenue, we're not taking away the readership from big media, but we're coming together to show people that there is an alternative and there is a better alternative, and that only can show through the content that we do. Now, yes, so we do a lot of membership programs, and it has really, really worked well for us in the past. And every single time that we have a membership program, we're already in collaboration with another news organization called News Laundry. So we do joint events, and we've always seen a crowd of about 200, 300 people coming. And every single time that we go to these people and then ask them, hey, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do further? We've already been reporting on the stories that we're talking about. We're the people asking the questions on the ground and stuff like that. Everybody has always appreciated the concept of having a collaborative election day special, as we're calling it. I think Siddharth's organization was the first one to come to us and said that we'll have a meeting. Surprisingly, no one hesitated. All 5 of us on that particular day, the same call, everybody agreed that we're doing this. And whatever happens, we don't have, the big media basically runs the numbers, right? They always show you which state and the polling numbers. We are not able to do it because we don't have the financial capacity to do it. We also don't have the production capacity to do it, but in whatever limited way we could do, we've been able to do that, and we did that in the first election counting day, and then we've progressed slightly better in the second one. This is the first time that we're doing actually a central election coverage of sorts, and we're hoping that this time we should be able to do a much better job. But we've always got the audiences back. See, this exercise that we've done has always been funded by the reader. And that's the kind of marketing message also that we're putting it out, right? We're completely ad-free when we're doing this. It's going to be completely member-paid. So we raise a budget and then we go to the members and say, hey, can you sponsor this coverage? Because at the end of the day, we want to serve you and we're not serving anybody else. So we've always been lucky to raise the kind of money that we want to invest in these kind of election coverages. And so that's never been a problem. But coming back to the whole concept of the member events and stuff like that, we've seen a lot of people coming and appreciating the kind of coverage that we've done. We collaborated with Scroll and News Laundry on one of the biggest scams, which was recently coming out, which is the electoral bond scam. Although Supriya doesn't want to say it, we did almost 40 stories. Okay, we're the only platform. I mean, 3 of us put together are the only, also Wire and the other, independent platforms. But nobody from big media did anything on this. Okay, and the other difficult part, especially coming down to elections, is, see, we have reporters on the ground, they have reporters, and we obviously go on the ground trying to cover all parties. But till date, the ruling party, none of them talked to us. So right now, actually last week, we put out a video of our reporter asking the ruling party member questions, and where he says, no comment, I will not talk to you, I will not talk to you. So that's how bad it is at this point in time.
And so another way by which you're sort of unifying your efforts is also through Digipub, right? It's quite an impressive national coalition of mostly public interest, independent media outlets. And the idea there is to create a strong ecosystem of support when it comes to legal implications, when it comes to diversifying revenue, finding new ways or new approaches of storytelling. And Siddharth, at The Wire, I know that you've been innovating around story formats and approaches to be able to educate audiences around these key issues, around the elections, and amid, to Supriya's point, to also increase trust among audiences and to counter misinformation. And as Vignesh mentioned, these events are not just about, or the collaboration is not just about creating revenue or reaching diverse communities, it's also about increasing the trust among the public in media. And so maybe we could return to the election-based program that you put together with 4 or 5 media. How did you see the audience engagement change as a result of that collaboration? And did you see a different type of an impact coming out of that program? Because I know that you're trying to do a national version of it for the upcoming elections.
So before I answer that directly, I'd like to just, again, by way of context for the audience, highlight the fact that collaboration among the digital or other independent media platforms has 3 or 4 distinct elements. The first, and perhaps the oldest, is the sharing of information and even sharing of stories. It's not uncommon for us to cross-publish, even when we have audiences that are uncommon. But we see a story that News Minute has published, which resonates, we feel, with our core readership. We will ask them to be able to republish, and often they've carried our stories. We've done this with Caravan. Recently, there was an article that Caravan published on army, on the torture and killing of 5 civilians in Kashmir, which the government ordered Caravan to take down. So we decided that we are going to, that this is dictatorial on the part of the government. And so we said that we're going to challenge this in our own way. So we ran an excerpt of Caravan's story, so-called banned story. And sure enough, the government ordered us also to take it down, and so we are also going to go to court. So collaboration in terms of sharing of content is the first aspect. Related to that is what you mentioned, Digipub. We felt that given the terrain in the media, anti-media terrain which exists, and the attitude of the Modi government and the kind of legal and regulatory changes that they were introducing, that there was need for a sort of industry-wide voice to handle this. So a number of platforms got together and started Digipub. Of course, Digipub as an industry-wide body of digital news platforms is also intended to deal with issues like training or capacity building, helping people, with revenue models and stuff. But what was urgent was dealing with the government's offensive in terms of new laws and new regulations. And so Digipub has been able to kind of allow us to speak collectively. And I think we've been much more effective in trying to counter what the government is doing, precisely because we have this body. The third aspect of collaboration is, of course, the election idea. But this is I would call that the fourth, because this is a product of the fact is that we are all we see ourselves as part of an independent media ecosystem. So you have big media, which is engaged in cutthroat competition with each other. And For us, we believe that the more Scroll grows its audience, or News Minute, or News Laundry, the better it is for us at the Wire, and I'm sure they feel the same way. That you now have two distinct spheres. You have the big media, which has abdicated its responsibility and thereby created a vacuum, and an expectation on the part of the public that there will be independent media which is going to do the job that media is meant to do. So the fact that we are seen by the public as, like, it's very rare for somebody to come up to me and say, oh, I love the work that you guys are doing at The Wire. They will invariably say The Wire and Scroll and News Minute. And I feel good about the fact that we are part of this ecosystem. Sure, there's, some people may like to think that they're lone warriors, lone wolves, but the fact is that we get strength from being part of a collective. And the election programming was sort of, the way it came up actually was what Vignesh and Supriya mentioned, that, NDTV collapsing. So as long as NDTV existed, there was still a kind of reasonable platform where you would have somewhat objective reporting, news analysis, in-studio discussions on a thing like an election. But when Adani captured it last November, and the changes have been really rapid. I mean, those of you who follow the channel or its website, it's just shocking how quickly the channel has plummeted. So we felt that, look, there is a crying need for a sober, platform of this kind where people can turn to. And since digital publishing and YouTube, a lot of young people consume video. They don't switch on their TV anymore, right? A lot of it is people tuning into their smartphones. So YouTube actually has created a level playing field between video producers of all kinds. We have our YouTube channel. We have something like 5 million subscribers, which is a very large number. News Minute, everybody has great audience, News Laundry has great engagement and great audience. So we said, okay, let's collectively come together, see if we can pool our resources in terms of election day programming. We did it with Karnataka first, English only, lots of teething troubles, but the response was amazing. I felt that actually, because I wasn't fully satisfied with the technical quality, quite frankly. Yeah, I mean, all of us were sort of, there were all kinds of glitches, right? But the audience said, look, this is fantastic that you guys have come together. And so we knew that we had to repeat it again. So when there were there were elections in 4 states, so we did that again. This time we experimented English and Hindi. First time was English only. I'm not sure the exchange of languages necessarily works well, so maybe for the coming election, we may just do it for English. We have to figure that out. But what's clear is that there is an audience expectation, and we are very keen to deliver that. Frankly, the sky's the limit then with what kind of collaboration we could do next.
Right, Siddharth, and we're hearing the same thing, a report for the world with our other newsrooms that are sort of trying and testing these models and improving them with new iterations. For example, our partner iStories in Russia that uses YouTube visualizations of their investigations, and they're able to reach millions of audiences with this because it's one of the few platforms that is still available in Russia. And they did the same. They tried out different templates, and every time they refined the process. And I know that while you might be a perfectionist about it and it's not quite there yet, the program did receive a lot of positive feedback or reviews even from mainstream media. So you really have a formula there that is working well. And so that reminds me of another series that has garnered quite a bit of attention. Vignesh just mentioned it, the investigation around the electoral bond scheme, which was launched in 2018, and it was purportedly supposed to solve corruption issues by allowing voters and corporations to anonymously donate to political parties. And there was widespread, actually, corruption around this bond scheme, right? And Supriya, you partnered with, again, a number of media, and you received evidence in the form of documents, and you analyzed this data together. You coordinated the reporting on this series. Could you tell us a bit about how that was different as an approach to a story? You produced 40 stories. That's quite impressive.
Yes, well, I completely lost track of the number of stories we produced together till Vignesh reminded me that we did 40 stories.
Role, right?
Yes. So, well, you've already given some background, but just to say that this electoral bond scheme was introduced in 2018, which allowed individual donors and businesses to give money to political parties with complete anonymity. So no public disclosure. So as a business, you can literally bribe the ruling party, get a favorable policy, and the public doesn't get to know. This sort of continued for many years, although a citizen watchdog went to court challenging this in 2018 itself. But the case dragged on for 6 years, and it was only in February this year that the Supreme Court gave its verdict. And I still remember that on the day the verdict was expected in the morning meeting at 10 a.m., there was complete consensus in our newsroom that the verdict's going to go in favor of the ruling party, because that's been the trend, with the Supreme Court. At 10:30, news comes in that the verdict is that the scheme is illegal and unconstitutional, and all the data around the donations has to be released. It was just exhilarating, because we've just not had any access to that information. As journalists, before I became an editor, I was an investigative reporter, and you kind of know the value of getting a big data set, but you also know the challenge that poses, where there'll suddenly be like pages and pages of information that needs to be processed, analyzed, reported. And while I was very excited, I was also nervous because we're a tiny newsroom, just a bunch of reporters, and I was kind of wondering how we're going to be able to do this in time, because weeks before the national election, you want to get these stories done quickly, you don't have time. So I just picked up the phone and called Dhanya Rajendran, the editor-in-chief of the News Minute, and I said, how are you planning to do this? And we had a chat, and I said, don't you think we should do this together? And she said, yeah, possibly. And News Minute and News Laundry already collaborate on coverage. So the three organizations and a bunch of independent journalists, by the next day, we had formed a big team. We had divided that into smaller teams. We, the next day, organized a quick training session for all the reporters, because many of them had never done this kind of work before. They had never looked at company documents. So we did a quick training, and day 3, the data lands, and then we are all at work. And I think within 2 hours of the data getting released, we put out our first story. And it was simultaneously published on 3 platforms: Scroll, News Minute, News Laundry. And then over the next 2 weeks, it was very intense. We had formed teams where there's a reporter from Scroll who covers pharmaceutical industry, working with 3 reporters from other organizations, and 4 of them did this brilliant story looking at how pharmaceutical companies donated close to 10 billion rupees. And a lot of those pharmaceutical companies had failed drug tests around the time that they gave money to these political parties. And by the way, those failed medicines that the drug regulator completely overlooked aren't just being consumed by Indians, because India is the pharmacy of the world. Those medicines travel around the world, around global south, and so it's quite a big story. We also found that a telecom company donated, again, I think 1.5 billion rupees to the government around the time that the telecom law was amended to allow for satellite spectrum to be allocated through an administrative order as opposed to through competitive auctions, which is what the Supreme Court mandated. And so many stories like that, which establish clear quid pro quo between money being given by businesses and favorable policy or other sort of decision-making around it. Also, another big story was that companies that were raided by investigative agencies donated money to the ruling party. And a lot of this work was possible because we sort of pooled together resources, and we had reporters collaborating across organizations as editors. Again, it was quite lovely to be, it was like an integrated newsroom where as an editor, I was briefing reporters working in other organizations. Dhanya was sort of briefing reporters in Scroll. We were like kind of editing, publishing. So for one story, it could be that the story's been reported by a Scroll journalist. It's been edited by a News Minute editor, and the graphics been produced by News Laundry. So there was sort of perfect synchronization. And really the learning out of that was that, as Siddharth mentioned, what sort of is the unifying factor here is that we're all small and independent. We may have our distinct editorial impulses, different ways of approaching stories, a distinct voice, but what we share is the idea that, we're here to do watchdog journalism, not lapdog journalism like the rest of establishment media in India is doing. We're here to speak truth to power, and because we see all the other newsrooms doing that, we respect them for their work. And that is what allows this kind of solidarity and camaraderie and an ability to work together. Because otherwise, as I said, these are newsrooms with their own identities, and like I kind of wonder, in another media environment, perhaps collaboration wouldn't come that easy. But what's making it smoother is because we share, our sort of foundational principles are the same, which is speaking truth to power. And the rest of it, whether, a particular organization writes its stories in a certain way and Scroll writes in another way, those things can be worked out. I mean, the same story can be edited in 2 different ways, if at all required. But the fact is that we're all sort of out there to do the same work, essentially.
Absolutely, and we're seeing those kind of collaborations across the world, in South Africa, Nigeria, Brazil, in other big countries that are facing similar challenges, both with government repression of rights to also scarce resources. And these media outlets are also working across formats. So maybe there's an outlet that works purely through podcasts, and there's another that is more data-driven, and together they can produce even richer content. And so what you just explained with that series around the bond scheme, that is just a perfect case of impact, not just in the form of accountability, but also looking at a lot of different sectors: health, communications, civil liberties, etc. And so, Vignesh, when you were planning impact around it, was there collaboration also among the teams in terms of impact focal points working together to see how do we map this out? What do we want to achieve? Did this happen into the early stages of the reporting? Would you do anything differently in terms of looking at how do you then convert the audiences that consume, or the audiences of these stories, into members and hopefully paid members?
I'll just add 2 points before I answer that question. So this is, with independent media, we've always seen that someone is carrying the other person's story forward, right? And that's something that has not been happening with big media. And big media did not even carry forward all the stories that we had done, right? We were the only people reporting on electoral bonds. We had international papers coming and talking about the kind of work that we had done. That is one point. The second point is, you should also understand that the journalists in big media are not allowed to tweet our stories, anything which has been published by independent media, or appreciate and stuff like that. They're not even allowed to tweet out or share the stories which are done by their own competitors. So that's the situation right now. But on the other hand, all the independent publications, nobody is restricted. We're very open to this kind of collaboration. And just talking about Siddharth's point on Digipub, we're the largest body in the country with the most amount of independent journalistic organizations which are registered. And we were not allowed to be approved by the central agency. It was only after repeatedly telling them that, boss, we've already set up an agency and you need to recognize us. And after like some 5 or 6 reminders, that they actually went and recognized us. Coming to impact, this is something that we talk about, at least from a revenue perspective or membership and subscription perspective. We were a very traditional media organization which was focusing on driving traffic and then obviously generating revenue. So it was basically you looking at reach and then converting that into revenue. over the years, we've converted a lot more into a reader revenue model. And one thing that we've recognized is if you can actually put out a story which has some kind of recognition or impact, converting that into revenue has become a lot more easier, and it's a lot more sticky. Okay, so yes, so whenever we focus on stories, we've gone beyond the route of saying that we need to publish about 50 stories and 60 stories a day to ensure that we're reaching a wider and wider and building up an audience. But now we've completely changed that and only looking at impactful stories, which could be hardly about, we might be publishing about 15 stories a day, but we're making sure that at least 5 to 6 of them on a daily basis have some kind of public interest or impact, which is what we are using then to make sure that, we're pushing it out to our readers and using that to convert into membership or reader revenue, as we call it. Just to give you a slight example, I mean, the stories that we've done on electoral bonds, we're a little bit shameless when it comes to asking people for money. Okay, so we do bombard all the people who come to our website and register, and we tell them these are the fantastic stories that we've done. We did this in association with so and so, so and so, so and so. This is the kind of impact it has brought out, and we're constantly reminding our members and readers that, hey, every week that this is the story that we're going to publish. We even have a preview nowadays, wherein if we're going to do a big investigative series, then two days before that itself, we want to tell all the people that read us that we're going to launch this story. 2 days later, please come to our website, please pay us money. It's going to be behind a paywall. So we've seen a massive bump in our reader revenue since the time of any of these collaborations or any of the impactful stories that we're trying to put forward and bring out. We also do some kind of an editorial meet every month where we bring in all the readers who are subscribers of the News Minute, and then they come on and talk to all the editors, where it's a completely open session where people can come and ask us whatever questions. When it comes to impact, we've noticed that whenever we've had these discussions with members, they've come forward and given us many story ideas and suggestions, and which have some kind of impact in the place that they originate from or something like that, wherein we have converted that into a story. Now, please understand, when we do something like that, that person is a member for life, right? So we've seen a considerable bump. Let me just, put in a nutshell that, yes, a considerable bump when we have actually focused on doing a lot more impactful stories, which is then tied down to some kind of a membership program.
And staying on that theme of impact, what we're trying to do at Report for the World, which is a global journalism service program, and we're delighted to be supporting specialized journalists at all of your newsrooms that are working on specific critical beats, right? So there's, at The Wire, for example, there is a reporter focused on political economy, health, and climate. So Siddharth, what have you seen in terms of that kind of consistent beat coverage? How does that influence, impact, both in terms of accountability, but if we also look at revenue as a form of impact? And we've also worked with you for nearly 3 years now, and our ultimate mission is that when we phase out support for a specific role, that there's enough audience, enough engagement, a certain level of accountability or change in public attitudes, and hopefully revenue, this is the trickiest part, so that it is a sustainable, permanent beat. We might not be close to achieving that perfectly, but we have seen that consistent coverage creates a different type of audience engagement. Could you go into a few of the details of maybe some of the stories produced by these journalists that created more dedicated audiences?
I think it's there is a one-to-one correspondence between the kind of revenue that the Wire generates, which is mainly through reader donations, and the journalism that we produce. And when we started the Wire, we were very aware of the fact that we would be much smaller than any big media organization and would never be able to offer the full range of subjects that they cover. So for us, it was important to focus on those areas which are undercovered, actually. So if you look at, big media, coverage of, all newspapers have, and TV channels notionally have environment and health as areas that they cover. Business, economy also are beats that they cover. But the focus tends to be so narrow that you don't have investigations, you don't have impactful stories, and increasingly big media shirks away from anything that is critical of the government. How can you cover the environment or political economy or health without at some stage doing a story that's going to annoy the government? It's not possible. And so, so for us, the fact that like we have sustained coverage now in these three areas has led to the publication of stories in the health sphere, for example. Like we have been out at the front on the whole issue of when Supriya was talking about medicine regulation, right? So the death of kids in the Gambia and Uzbekistan because of defective cough medicine from India. So the government of India took the view that no, that this isn't related to Indian cough medicine. And so our health reporter was very persistent in working with the WHO, working with the Gambian authorities in order to actually generate, she was able to break stories on the reports that came out, which conclusively showed what the cause of death for these kids were. And of course that annoys the powers that be, but I think readers like the fact that we're able to break and do those stories. Similarly, in the arena of political economy, like for us to do deep dives into Adani's business model. Like we had a very impactful story on Adani's port acquisitions. You will recall that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, there were all these allegations about how Adani was buying airports. And I mean, there was lots of anecdotal evidence of the government kind of strong-arming companies into selling their assets to Adani. Nothing could be proved because nobody went on the record. And so we kind of said, okay, let's look at, say, one sector and see what kind of a pattern emerges from the kind of acquisitions that the Adani Group is doing. And so we looked at the acquisition of ports in South India. And we're able to, again, there's no smoking gun of the kind that allows you to make a very categorical statement. But just in terms of unpacking the manner in which India's largest business house has expanded into different sectors is a great contribution. So to be able to work on those stories and to present them to readers, I think has helped us to maintain that reputation as being a platform which provides stories that the big media will not do. And it is our hope that being able to do these kinds of stories will, as Vignesh says, generate stickiness among readers. Because the more loyal your readers are, the more frequently they visit and read, the greater is the likelihood that they will donate. It's very hard to draw a one-to-one correspondence between a set of stories and revenue. But for me, it's very clear that the greater the output in terms of quality and quantity, the greater is the ability to actually appeal to readers to give money. And so far, this is now our third year or fourth year without any kind of philanthropic support in India. And so this is, so this has been a very kind of, the fact that our journalism now is basically paying for itself is something that we are very proud of.
Absolutely, and gradually moving away from the philanthropic support, or at least diversifying the sources, is part of what actually the program is trying to do and at Report for the World. And while this is not a perfect calculation or a recipe that you can repeat, there is value in collecting as many examples of impact from our newsrooms across the world. Because if we have 15 climate-focused reporters and they're reporting on similar issues, although across different geographies, the more we're able to extrapolate the best examples, the more we're able to discuss with these newsrooms on what approaches might have worked and how to systemize that and how to actually integrate that thinking into the editorial plan and the impact planning. I know that we're running out of time, and we have 5 minutes left, but I wanted to ask Vignesh a last question on the fact that you have 3 beats that are really critical issues in these elections: civil liberties, gender, and caste. And they are critical because of the Modi government's record of repressing women, religious minorities, and the Dalit community. So how are you in this election period planning these stories, and how does that intersectionality also plug into your impact and revenue efforts?
I think predominantly, these kind of issues that we're talking about, I don't know if the Modi government has so much of an impact, especially in the south, because they're not so, apart from the state of Karnataka, yeah? Not yet. Not yet. But see, these kind of stories, and I'll be very honest with you, Preethi, I mean, we obviously do track issues on the ground and stuff like that, especially when it comes to civil liberties, gender, caste. And as an organization, we've always taken that gender angle right from the very beginning. We've been around for about 10 years. There are a lot of times where our reporters have to travel interior parts of whatever state that they're covering on and stuff like that to bring out that impact. We've done an analysis of all these kind of stories, right? And we've been doing this for quite some time. And then when you actually open Google Analytics and then you look at the numbers and then you realize that these stories are, and we do quite decent amount of traffic. So we see a lot of people reading, and it'll say sometimes 1,000 people reading or 2,000 people reading. Whereas the other stories which talks about some entertainment or sports, celebrities getting married and stuff like that, which is also something that we occasionally publish. And then you see the numbers at, whatever, 50,000, 60,000, and 70,000. And then we realize that, what do we do with these kind of impactful stories? Do we still continue this? But we've been getting some kind of grants and support and stuff like that from different organizations. And that has really helped us in actually covering these stories. To be very honest, for independent small publications like us, it's very difficult to actually justify even travel from one city to a village, because that report has to be there for 10 days. And many times we always look at it and say that, how can we actually fund this story, right? So see, at the end of the day, we also have to survive. We also have salaries to pay and stuff like that. But these philanthropic organizations have come forward and given us specific beats, because we also want to continue reporting on that. And we're hoping that by using those stories and then moving out and approaching our readers and telling them that this is the kind of impactful work that we can do. It was supported in the past by whatever organizations. But going forward, we are very sure of the fact that those kind of stories will convert into paying members. See, right now, we do campaign-based stories. Let's say that if we're doing a story on health in some interior part, or even gender for that matter, if we put out an appeal to our readers and saying that we're doing a 5-part series on gender, this is the kind of money we want to raise, we've always topped up our requirements from that perspective. So there is an audience for these kind of stories, there's no doubt, and that audience will definitely support you in your long-run plans. So these are the stories that's something that we will never stop at the end of the day, because we, like Siddharth said, our journalism, we believe, will continue helping us survive, at least from a longer perspective. Just to add to that, if I might get just a quick response from you, Supriya, on the same aspect of having 3 critical roles. So we're supporting journalists that are working on health and education as one beat, right? And then gender and climate. Again, a lot of intersectionality there. So how are you planning your stories with this election coverage? Are they working together? Do you see more camaraderie, and do you see richer reporting coming out of 3 years of 3 reporters working consistently on one beat?
It's really meant a lot for our newsroom to have these 3 reporters consistently cover these areas, which are very important very underreported because there are these beats in newspapers, but as Siddharth said, they're sort of mostly chasing kind of routine information, press releases put out by the government. They're not really using a critical lens to look at health or education or climate, environment, gender, which is what our reporters have been able to do over the past 3 years. And what's been very good is that they extensively travel. We've possibly covered every corner of the country in the past 3 years through this reporting. They've been able to spend a lot of time crafting each of their stories. All 3 reporters have won multiple awards. Those stories are not necessarily the most read stories on the site, but they're the stories that even if it's a smaller group of readers, that's the kind of work that they do not get elsewhere and they deeply appreciate. And that is why I believe that does also, although it's hard to do this one-on-one correspondence, I think that's one big reason why reader support scroll, because that's the kind of work that isn't really being done by big media. Now, in this election year, all 3 reporters are also doing election stories. Again, as I said, elections are a great time to shine light on important issues. And that's what they're doing through their work. They're sort of like the environmental reporter, Vaishnavi. She's sort of done stories on the concerns of people living in Himalayan states who are suddenly, having to deal with these series of dam projects, which very recently in one of the states led to flash floods and massive destruction. And she spoke to people about, what it means for them to, does this election, is it an opportunity for them through their votes to effect change? And the answer is no, but that's a conversation that's important to have. And because these journalists are sort of, not covering politics steadily, but they're covering health, education, environment, they bring a completely different perspective to our election coverage, which is very useful. And as I said, it's like for us as small independent newsrooms, this is work that we want to do consistently. It's a bit challenging though, because this is actually resource intensive work. All of these reports take much longer than reporting what a politician said a particular day or what sort of controversy broke out, because this is painstaking work. This involves travel. Travel is expensive, and therefore, like, support from Report
Absolutely.
for the World mattered quite a bit for us.
And a level of specialization as well, right? And so what we're trying to do here is also develop the career trajectories of a new generation of much more diverse representative journalists. And that applies to the 66 locally based reporters that we're supporting. They have intimate connections to these communities and unique access. So we're doing 2 things here. One is building the career trajectories of individual journalists, and then second, helping assisting, supporting, serving newsrooms like yourselves in sort of creating sustainability around those beats. I'm afraid we've run out of time and we didn't have time for a Q&A, but please grab them when they're off stage and they're available to answer any other questions you might have. And thank you so much for your time.